You know what usually happens when a business starts to struggle? When delivery gets a bit sluggish, margins start to thin out, or the amount of rework suddenly spikes, the automatic reflex is almost always to just pour more fuel on the fire. We launch a new marketing campaign, hire more staff, buy another flashy piece of software, or honestly just work longer hours. We just assume the machine itself is basically fine, and it just needs more volume to push through whatever bottleneck we're facing. But we have to ask a much harder question. What happens when the declining standard isn't just some isolated glitch? What happens when the actual structure of the business itself is what's fundamentally broken?
Look, this brings us to a stark, slightly brutal reality. Most businesses simply do not need another tactic. They need a complete rebuild. A new ad campaign or a slick new software tool absolutely cannot save a structure that is literally designed to repeatedly turn your inputs into delays, burnout, and disappointed customers. A tactic just changes what a company does today. But a rebuild? That fundamentally changes how a company creates value. When your underlying architecture is flawed, throwing another tactic at it is just putting decoration around a defect.
So why do so many founders flat out refuse to rebuild while there's actually still time to do it? Well, because rebuilding is painful. It requires a leader to stand up and admit that the current system is wrong, that their familiar, comfortable habits are basically lies, and that their so-called growth plan is really just a lot of motion without progress. To avoid taking on that structural responsibility, they just keep adding more input, more marketing, more complex offers, more absolute chaos. And they just pretend that all this frantic activity equals value.
But this avoidance creates a deeply dangerous illusion. Adding volume to a broken machine does not create scale. It merely creates faster momentum toward an inevitable collapse. Sure, the business is definitely moving faster, but it is moving faster in the exact wrong direction. You aren't scaling your success. You are simply scaling your defects.
Now, you might be wondering, how does a defective machine manage to stay alive for so long? It's because of what we call the survivability trap. People rarely dismantle a failing system while it still feels, well, survivable. A little margin loss? We just accept that as the cost of growth. A little extra rework? We just call that iteration. The company normalizes its own dysfunction simply because it hasn't completely died yet. But survivable is not healthy. A machine can keep coughing along for years while quietly destroying your time, your talent, and your future runway. The truth is, that feeling of safety you might have, it's a shared denial. The system is only surviving because someone else is absorbing the cost of the failure. Let's look at the hidden subsidies of a broken system. You might think your business is resilient, but actually, it's being heavily subsidized by employee sacrifice, immense customer patience, constant founder overwork, old relationships, and delayed consequences. You have talented people manually compensating for your broken processes every single day. That isn't resilience. That is hidden fragility. Let's think about how this actually plays out operationally. When a system is healthy, adding volume creates leverage. But when a system is defective, doing more just amplifies the defect. Think about it. Pouring more leads into a weak sales process, that just produces more wasted conversations faster. Pushing more customers into a broken onboarding process, you just generate confusion at scale. Pumping more effort into a broken machine literally just gets you faster burnout, more missed deadlines, and a lot more internal conflict. This brings us to a really crucial point. Let's compare sweat against structure. We are constantly sold this universal cliché that the solution is just working harder. But frankly, effort is not the constraint. If your workflow requires 5 completely unnecessary approvals, working harder doesn't magically remove that bottleneck. If your team constantly receives incomplete information, sweating more doesn't fix the intake process. The problem isn't a lack of sweat, it is the machine that receives that sweat and immediately converts it into waste. The truly hard move isn't adding more effort. The hard move is changing the structure. So, how do you actually know when it's time to stop optimizing and start tearing the whole thing down? You have to understand the difference between a fix and a rebuild. A fix works when the workflow is fundamentally sound, and the failure is just local. Maybe you just need to clarify who owns a task or repair a single handoff. But a rebuild becomes absolutely necessary when those exact same failures keep returning, when your business is relying on permanent heroic effort just to deliver the basics, and when adding volume makes performance noticeably worse. When optimization is just preserving a machine that shouldn't exist anymore, it's literally like putting premium gas in a car with a blown transmission. You don't need a tune-up, you need a rebuild. And this brings us to a really fascinating concept used to force this kind of structural maturity, the negative price guarantee, or -1.
Now, this isn't just some marketing gimmick or a decorative refund policy you bury in your terms of service. It is a strict forcing function. Under a -1 standard, if the promised value is missing, the price actually goes negative on the seller. The seller accepts a real financial penalty. It completely removes a company's ability to just pretend that mere activity is the same thing as delivering value. That forcing function pushes the entire organization toward one very serious adult sentence. From today on, value must be measurable, and I'm responsible for delivering it. When you attach a real stinging financial consequence to missing the mark on value, rebuilding instantly stops being this emotional debate about who prefers what software. It becomes an operational necessity. You stop defending broken processes just because they feel familiar, and you finally start redesigning them based on hard evidence.
Okay, so how do we actually execute this? We don't just run in and destroy everything recklessly. We follow a highly strategic, evidence-based blueprint known as the Rebuild Before Collapse map. This is the exact playbook for systematically dismantling the broken system and constructing a brand new machine built purely for producing measurable value, without relying on hype, hope, or untested assumptions. Executing this map requires a very tight, systematic flow. Step 1, you identify the survivable failure, that recurring issue you only tolerate because it hasn't killed the company yet. Step 2, immediately stop feeding that defect with more volume. Just pause it. With the bleeding stopped, step 3 is to clearly define the promised value and the exact proof that confirms it arrived. From there, step 4, you map the actual value flow to spot the leaks. This allows you to move to step 5 and fundamentally change the machine through removal, redesign, or automation. And most importantly, step 6, all of this has to happen while you still have the runway, the cash, the time, and the trust to actually execute it.
That timing aspect, it is absolutely critical. Rebuilding early is painful, no doubt about it, but rebuilding late is fatal. An early rebuild gives you options. You can test a small pilot program, you can protect your customers, preserve your cash, and learn from controlled, small-scale failures. A late rebuild, on the other hand, happens in a state of absolute panic. Revenue is already falling, your most talented people are totally exhausted, and customer trust is completely gone. When you wait too long, you lose the luxury of choosing your method. The market just steps in and performs emergency surgery on you without anesthesia.
So why do so many smart people wait? It's a trick of perspective. Rebuilding feels incredibly expensive today because its cost is highly visible in the present. You might have to pause a lucrative offer, take a hit on short-term revenue, or swallow your pride and admit a strategy was wrong. The cost of not rebuilding, however, is distributed. It's just a small delay today, a slightly weaker margin tomorrow, a bit of founder exhaustion next week. Because the decline is spread out across tomorrow, it looks cheap. But let's be incredibly direct here. Denial waits for the crash. True maturity rebuilds while runway still remains.
To see this principle operating in the real world, take a look at NegBook. It is the literal, practical embodiment of the negative price standard. It's actually the first book in the world with a negative price. The promise is incredibly clear. Either you read the book and it helps you, or you read the book and it pays you. By accepting that strict consequence, the offer is forced to clearly define the specific outcome, the workflow required, and the ultimate responsibility. If you apply this exact same mechanism to a business rebuild, it instantly exposes exactly where your machine is leaking and exactly where your promises are exceeding your operational reality. Now, if you want to apply this standard without recklessly gambling the entire future of your company, you can use what's called the one diagnostic. You don't just slap a negative price guarantee onto a machine you refuse to even examine. Instead, you use this diagnostic to examine just one single real offer. It helps you identify which outcomes are actually measurable, it maps your real workflow, and it exposes exactly where adding volume is just amplifying the problem. Crucially, it allows you to test a redesigned workflow in a tightly controlled, isolated pilot.
So I want to leave you with a bit of a diagnostic challenge. I want you to look at the optimizations, the shiny new software, and those extra hours you and your team are pouring into your business right this second. Ask yourself honestly, would improving this current structure merely preserve a machine that should no longer even exist? Are you just finding highly efficient ways to do the exact wrong work?
Your business likely does not need another clever tactic, more tools, or more heroic founder sacrifice. It needs a different machine. If you are an operational leader, do not wait until exhausted employees, disappearing margins, and angry customers are forced to perform this diagnosis for you. You can apply for the -1 diagnostic right now at negbook.com/negative-price standard to systematically examine your structure.
Remember, the hardest move in business isn't figuring out how to add more output. The hardest, yet absolutely most vital move is making the deliberate choice to change the machine itself.
Stop feeding the broken system. Rebuild before the market takes the choice away.